It's funny, isn't it, how easy it is to forget who else sees and hears about the antics that you get up to over the years, because you don't always get the feedback, especially if it's something good that you've done. Hey, Jason von Breven here. Had the opportunity to get together with some of my long-term friends recently. It's a long time since I've seen them. I saw them in the passing maybe a year ago, but before that it's been a good 10 years. So it was actually an amazing time for me. One of the things that came up in conversation, among many things, was the healings that I'd done for a mutual friend, Mary. I'd done 2 specific healings for her. The day that I met her, she tells me that I'd done this healing on the spots that she had on her face. I kind of reached out to touch her face, and as I got near to her face, I kind of pulled back, as if I'd felt the pain that she'd had. And as a result of that, she said that later on, or the next day, or a couple of days later or something, the pain had completely disappeared and the spots had completely disappeared from her face. The healing that I'm most proud of doing for Mary was when I went to see my friends and she was sitting on their lawn and she had her wrist in her belly and she was rocking herself backwards and forwards on the lawn. I asked her what was wrong and she said she had carpal tunnel syndrome. She was due to go for an incision later in the year, in November. So I asked her if we could try an experiment, and on saying yes, I picked up a stick and roughly drew a Reiki symbol on the grass. By that point I'd even forgotten how to write this particular Reiki symbol properly, because it had been a few years since I'd specifically practiced Reiki in any way, shape or form. So I just drew it as best I could and nonchalantly tossed the stick over my shoulder with a deliberate, nonchalant attitude in order to make a point about healing, something that I really feel that I know about healing and that a lot of people don't understand or don't get, that maybe I do because I have an interest and I believe certain things that are said about Reiki and about healing are true, and a lot of people overlook certain things. The reason that I'm putting this video together is because I just wanted to introduce my other videos that I've made over the years. I've made a series of videos in order to try and explain some of what I've done with healing and Reiki and NLP and hypnotherapy and Huna and various other healing arts. I believe in healing. I believe that all healing arts teach you various different aspects and different ways of going about healing, and they each have their flavour, they each have their way and their energy about them. They're all wonderful things, but at the end of the day they're healing. A thing about Reiki, and probably about most, if not all, of the healing arts, is that the healing arts don't just teach you how to do healings or how to be a healer. They give you an energy which borders on a kind of magical energy. So I'm kind of proud sometimes, and I like to have the word wizard around me. I like to class myself as a wizard, because when I pull my act together, when I pull my finger out, when I'm really challenged, when I choose to be, I do operate like a wizard. I can kind of wriggle my fingers and make things happen. I can do things for people, and things that they want to happen will happen. I can do abracadabra off the cuff and create certain kinds of outcomes. I'm blessed with this kind of ability. So in my videos I say that I'm a wizard. I truly believe that I am, yes, because a wizard is a wizard regardless, surely. Like magic is magic. It's not really fully explainable, really, is it? And I would say that wizardry, more than healing specifically, is what I've studied most of my life. As you'll hear me say in a few moments on one of my introductory videos, you study plumbing and you become a plumber. You study carpentry to become a carpenter. Well, I've studied wizardry to become a wizard, especially a wizard of the likes of healing. When I mentioned earlier on that it's all too easy to forget the number of people who see your shenanigans over the years, what I meant was that the friend who I've just been to see recently, who mentioned Mary's healings back to me, he was the one that brought it up. He was the one that mentioned it back to me. We spoke about a lot of other things as well that I'd made premonitions about to another friend of mine. We were able to put a lot of things straight, maybe even lay a lot of ghosts. There's been a lot of things I felt unable to say for a good number of years, for fear of saying the wrong thing, for fear of offending people, for fear of causing all kinds of the wrong kinds of emotions within certain people's families. Not necessarily towards me specifically, because I'm quite used to getting some negative flack from certain people, but of causing the wrong kinds of emotions within certain people's families, and I didn't want to really do that. There comes a time when you have to tell your story, when you have to stop hiding your light under a bushel for the sake of offending other people. When I went to see my friends, one of the first questions Danny and Josie asked me on that day was about our mutual friend Lillian. Lillian was a very good friend of all of ours, plus a whole load of other people. She was one of these legendary women who was totally open house, and all sorts of homeless waifs and strays used to turn up on her door, and she would just be open house and allow them in and allow them to stay. Her and I palled about for close to 20 years. The bigger story was that many years ago, when I was 5 years old, I walked out of school holding her daughter's hand. Obviously, my mum and her nudged one another and said something along the lines of, "Blimey, don't they start young these days?" Years later, when I was 23, I landed homeless on her door. She was living with a daughter at the time, so yes, she was open house and she gave me space, but it was tense because her daughter was trying to build a professional career of her own. I'm sure that if Lillian could speak now, she would probably say that I was a healer for her, because long before ever meeting up again with Lillian, all throughout my childhood, as I've been growing up, that's what I've wanted to be, is a healer. And I've not exactly kept that secret. Sometimes I've spoken about it very openly, and other times I've kept it close to my chest. At the time that I had knocked on Lillian's door homeless and she'd taken me in, she was quite ill. She could barely walk 200 yards. We started to go out for longer and longer walks, 3 or 4 months in the woods, along the river. We even traversed along the cliffs along the Avon River in Alness. I'm sure she would say that I got her back to a fair level of fitness. Throughout, a lot of people wouldn't allow me that accolade of being any kind of healer, partly because some of them weren't exactly pally with Lillian, and partly because some of them weren't exactly pally with me. So pan forward to my visiting Danny and Josie and Marnie this time around, just a few days back. What an amazing time that was. They asked me about Lillian. They all feel so bad because since that time, for a good few years now, Lillian has been in a care home. She is close to 70. She's been in a care home. She had a stroke that half paralysed one side of her body and took away her power of speech. She's in a wheelchair now. I haven't seen her for a good few years. One of the things that I pointed out to Danny and Josie and Marnie and Louise was the fact that for a lot of years, because of the stress that she was under, she used to lose her rag quite a lot and shout at the big man upstairs, you know. And she would literally say to him, "For Christ's sake, God, please give me a stroke and take away my power of speech, strike me dumb." You know, this kind of thing. Those exact words at times. Marnie used the word ironic for that little story. Danny and Josie and Louise told me that they never knew that to which I also pointed out that there were a lot of things that they hadn't heard. I used to tell Lillian all kinds of things, and I used to say to her at the time, Lillian, mark that in red in your diary, this will come to pass. Those are my exact words. For example, in 1996, I ranted on about a comet that was on its way to us and was going to pass closer than the moon is to us, and it was a fair size of comet that would have caused major catastrophe had it hit our planet. And I even called the comet Jar 1. You know, a few months later I went into the newspaper shop in Everton and happened to notice a Focus magazine that had the headline on it about the passing of 1996 Jar 1 that had passed closer than the moon is to us. I told Lillian at the time that there would be a population explosion of seals that were caused by the substances in the tail of this comet falling into the waters, and that the seals would swim upstream eating the fish so that local fishermen couldn't get a very good catch. I told Lillian that there was going to be a news item on Highland News or Murray News or Scottish News that we would see. This news item did in fact come on the telly. I spoke about machines that would take tiny minute thin slices of the human body and create photographs and maps of the human body out of them, various types of medical scanning equipment, to which a number of our friends encouraged me to look at going to university to study physics with medical technology or something similar to that. And that was a path I did actually follow up at the time. A lot of people don't know the premonitions that I made to Lillian. The many things that I said to her over the years that were demonstrations of psychic ability, because that's what I'd intended them to be, demonstrations of psychic ability. I used to say things like, watch this, Lillian, mark this in red in your diary, watch this person's going to say and do such and such, and lo and behold they'd say and do such and such. You know, there's countless things I could go on about. A lot of them I can't even remember. I've forgotten more than I've ever remembered. I used to have a funny saying that some people ask if you've ever had a psychic experience, to which my response would often be that in actual fact my whole life seems to be a lifelong 24/7 psychic experience. I think these stories, a very small amount of which I relayed to Danny the other day, particularly the one about Lillian shouting at the big man upstairs to give her a stroke and take away her power of speech. I think I'm going to offend a few people with that story. It's not my intention to offend, but I'm laughing nonetheless because it's about time. I think that it's a result of saying that to Danny that Danny's particular attitude wasn't, oh how ironic. You know, I've been so close to Lillian that I've seen things about her that a lot of other people haven't seen and don't know. But I think it's as a result of telling these little stories about Lillian begging God to give her a stroke and take away her power of speech that Danny actually said, you know, Jace, I didn't used to have much store in all of this kind of synchronicity stuff and psychic stuff and all that kind of stuff, but I've certainly changed my tune since then. He said to me that it wasn't because he never believed, he just didn't have much time for it or much store for it. But I can't remember if he actually said he saw me out the window doing that thing for Mary when I carved that Reiki symbol into the grass, or if he'd heard about it later on because Mary had told him later. I can't remember what he said, but it doesn't actually matter that much either. Mary and him were very close, very good pals, so she would have shared that with him, and he probably would have been a bit flabbergasted because she'd been to see Reiki masters, she'd had treatments done, and I come along and that very night she didn't have to put the spatula on her wrist and she never had the carpal tunnel syndrome pain ever again. The thing that I'm trying to say is thank you, Danny. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, for one. That's one thing I wanted to say, because there's me talking about healing and doing healings and being healed and getting healings. and Danny has just given me a great healing there in bringing back to me respect for having done that work, where I don't feel like I've had a lot of people's respect for doing the likes of healing works for a long time. I felt very dismissed for a long time. I felt that people haven't understood. I felt that people have not wanted to have accorded me that accolade of being a healer. I've wanted to be a healer long before meeting anybody here in Scotland. I've actually done some healings long before coming to Scotland. I've had a life before coming to Scotland, and I think this is what is far too easy to be overlooked. It's funny, you know, sometimes I call myself Gulliver, like Gulliver's Travels. You know, in some places I'm a giant and in some places I'm a midget. So thank you very much, Dan, for bringing back to me that you were part of that and you were there at the time and that you were aware of that healing that I did for Mary. Those words, that attitude in and of itself has brought back a lot of my own esteem. It says that there are people who do believe that I am for real in the things that I have actually done for people. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Marnie. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Pam. Thank you all. Thank you.